Hi everyone, this is Tommy from Studio Ultra Mega with another Operation Battle Ready tutorial. Episode 40, Object Source Lighting is Secretly Easy. So the actual core purpose of this tutorial is to highlight Miniature Ghost Tints. And what I've chosen to use to highlight their usefulness is how they can make object source lighting so much easier to do. So that's why I did all this stuff preliminarily, before the video, and I'm showing you the angles at which I blasted this with an airbrush. That base color is Scale Color African Shadow. It's a good muted purple. And then I just kind of blasted the sword and that side of the model with some pink flesh, and then some birch. And that's it. I didn't mask anything. It's a simple directional blast with the airbrush. A broken airbrush, by the way. And now I'm taking some of the Miniature Yellow, and I'm preparing that I showed you I had a loaded brush with water. Usually a brush loaded with water is enough to thin this out to where you want to work with it most of the time. So as I lay that in, I want to discuss some of the properties of these ghost tints. They're very thick and they're very adhesive. So their real purpose is that of a glaze, but you can wash with them if you loosen it up with some water and are kind of quick with the brush there. You've got a good bit of working time, but once it starts to set up on the model, you don't want to try pushing it around till it's totally dry, because like I said, it's very adhesive. You see how that yellow is clinging to that blade? That's Citadel washes don't do that. This is something that I enjoy about the ghost tints. And I'm just getting that yellow everywhere that I've done any highlights on this model. And I'm gonna not really pay attention to what I'm doing. You see, I'm not even using a good brush. I don't like using nice brushes with the ghost tints. I haven't experienced any special damage they receive, but I don't like risking it with something that's really nice. These are some beat up old Raphaels that I have. Now I'm going to add some orange, and I'm just going to kind of continue this thinned out, loose. See, there's my loaded brush. Just loaded it up with like a little bit of water and use it to thin out the orange a little bit. And again, it's just a very thin layer. And we're going to go right from the yellow further down into those, further away from the sword and into highlights. We're going to get up on the base of the sword a little bit to add some dimension to the glow on the blade. Usually I play back these tutorial videos at double or quadruple speed, so you're not sitting here for an hour watching me do one blend. I certainly hope you didn't think I painted that fast in all these videos, but this one we kept real time, because I wanted you to see how the ghost tints work, and I didn't want to rush through anything I'm doing here, because this is kind of a new medium I haven't shown off much. And yeah, you see I'm just really generally getting those glow colors down wherever that my quick little airbrush blast of birch ended up landing on the model. Now here, I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but what I didn't like here is my orange and yellow on the sword kind of had a real definitive cutoff point, and it was still wet enough that I just took a little bit of a damp brush, ran it over the orange, and it blended that line away. Okay, so the next darker tint of the glow is going to be orange with just a little bit of Ghost Tint Fresh Blood in it. It's a very warm red, not like Carroburg Crimson, which is almost a maroon wash. Fresh Blood is red, really bordering on the warm, so it mixes with orange real well. And then another tip is Fresh Blood plus Magenta, which is another ghost tint that's available, makes the reddest red you've ever seen, and we may try to feature that in a future tutorial. But we're going to continue on with the OSL here, and we're going to start putting in that deeper orange. Alright, we already see it starting to come along here, and now we're going to break out the most important ghost tint, brown. And don't be misled, the brown is actually sepia, and what that means is when you know that something is sepia, you're getting brown, but it's going to have green in it. You're going to want to be careful when you mix it with other colors, because you might think brown and yellow is going to get you a tone that it just isn't, because the yellow brings the green out of the sepia. So be forewarned, but when you're mixing brown with other warm colors, it usually comes out nice and warm. But we like the sepia, especially for things like bone, all right, and dirty cloth and that kind of thing. So we're going to take that and go all over the model with it, thinned out like we did last time. But here's what's key. I go over the areas I've painted to glow. A lot of times when you see OSL, when people just airbrush OSL on, they just blast the model. And they blast the dimension away. Like, you know, if you have a glowing plasma gun, all of a sudden there's no shadows. The source of light envelops everything, whether it should be in a recessed area of shadow from the source of light or not. So taking this brown and glazing over all these bones, it's mostly a glaze, but it's a little bit of a wash. But we're not really letting it pool up too much. But this, especially going over all the yellow, is going to make the glow look like it's lighting the thing as opposed to the object actually being the color of the glow, which is what you see a lot in like 40K Titans, people just airbrush a plasma coil glow onto something, and then they don't go back in and try to glaze or wash it at all, and it's just a big blast of blue and white that obscures all the detail of the gun. That's exactly what we don't want. And here, I just on the head real quick, I just hit it with a little fresh yellow to make sure it was popping as glowy as I wanted it to next to that sword. And now we're going to do that cloth draped across him. And we're going to go for a red tone. And I'm going to show you how we achieve that when we've already gone and painted glow onto the model. So again, working with fresh blood as a color. We're going to lay that over the entire cloth, front and back, whether it's in underglow or not. Now we're going to put out some Ghost Tint Magenta and go over the cloth again. And we're using the previous layers to our advantage here. That nice thin layer of magenta over the existing red that's already there is going to create that bold red I talked about. And we're still going to see the glow inherent underneath that red. Because all the layers we're seeing are properly translucent. Now while we're letting that sash dry a little, because we don't want to hit it while it's still sticky, I'm going to put out some oil discharge. That's the black ghost tint. Also, a extremely useful catch-all kind of color here. And a lot of times when you use black to thin out other colors, it just kind of muddies them and makes it dirty. But I get still some pretty pure tones out of colors when I add black. Ghost tints mix really well. You can create some really cool tones, and they're fun to experiment with because sometimes you want to mix two colors, sometimes even three, into a single layer, and sometimes you want to apply those layers individually and separately and stack them on top of each other. And sometimes you can even get different effects from the different order you might stack these colors on the model. So they're fun to experiment with, and you can always get kind of a different look out of them. Like, look how dynamic this is looking now. Remember what we started with, purple with a blast of bone over it. And now that sash is finally starting to set up, and we see that starting to look nice. And now we're hitting the ground, and again, the glow where the sword is hitting the ground, we're going to hit all that with the oil discharge as well. Okay, because we imagine the light casting off that sword when it hits the front of one of those little pebbles or rocks there. The second side of it's going to have a little bit of shadow, right? The opposite side. So the wash gives us that nice impression, but we can still see the glow, and it looks like it's being cast on actual ground. Notice soda cap lids make the perfect tools to paint with ghost tints out of. I don't like putting them on a wet palette, they get too thin. And the way these things dry, once they're totally dry, you can peel them right out of the cap. They totally come out clean, so the caps remain reusable. And in this case, again, here's where I added just a little bit of black into that magenta, and I'm going over the sash one last time. You see it hasn't muddied it, it doesn't look dirty. It's just now a deeper, richer magenta. And I'm going to go ahead and apply that to some of the back side of the model, because I kind of want to emphasize the purple. Remember that original color we have underneath all this stuff is a muted purple. But I'm also trying to make sure that I get all the cloth. And then because ghost tints are all gloss, the final step is just a simple matte varnish over the whole thing once it's completely dry. And there you go, a half-hour OSL job. I'd like to thank all of our patrons over at Patreon that make these videos possible. We would not be able to spare the time without your support. So if you found this video useful or entertaining, or hopefully both, I would be forever in your debt if you could be so kind as to like and subscribe.